And then I remember when we were leaving, I said to him, look, I know you really, because he obviously is coming from the States. He doesn't know when he's going to come back to the UK.
Yeah.
And I said, look, why don't we go have a look at the places that you wanted to see this morning? So, Buckingham Palace, Big Ben, these kind of places. Why don't we go see them? Because, and he was like, no, it's, it's late enough already. It was like 10, 11 or whatever it was. He was like, no, forget that. You have to get back to Birmingham. And I was like, listen, dude, you're going all the way back to America. That's like a 16-hour round trip if you ever want to come back to see Big Ben. This is, for me, is like an extra 2 hours tonight. I'd much rather the 2 hours of my get wasted than you having to do 16 hours just to come back to look at these landmarks. He's like, are you sure? I was like, yeah. Like, even if we went back to Birmingham, I had to come back to see these things. That's a trek. We're here already in London. Let's go have a look at them. And Ibrahim was like, oh, if you guys are going that way, then what if I jump in the car? Because I'm going that way. My house is that way. And you can drop me off on the way. I was like, okay, me being polite guy, a miskin one. So I was like, all right, jump in. And he was a nice enough guy. Ibrahim was a very nice guy, actually. So I was like, jump in. And Ibrahim turned out to be like London historian extraordinaire. So we're driving around the streets, and he's like, so this building was made in 18 something.
On The Voice and everything.
Yeah. Like he's a Somali guy who was like the poshest Somali guy you've ever met. Bash used to...
I know Ibrahim.
Yes. Bash used to say that, right? When people were like, who's Ibrahim? And people would try to describe him, and Bash would just be like, he's Somali, but he sounds English. And everyone was like, oh, Ibrahim. Yeah. So he had that voice, right? So he was like, and this road, as you can see, this building, what you might not have known was it was owned by this person. And like, first of all, the first 2-3 times he's doing it, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then I was like, yo, Ibrahim, how do you know all this stuff? And he was like, so I studied this at universities. And he knew like loads about, so it ended up being like really good. And he was also with us when we went to the hospital, and he was helpful from that perspective. He was like, he just knows things. Just knows things. So we were driving around, and it's London in the middle of the night, and I was doing dumb stuff, like, what's the bridge next to Big Ben? Is it Westminster Bridge?
I don't know, either that or Tower Bridge.
One of those bridges, right? So like, I just stopped my car on the bridge, and I was like, yeah, Umar and Ibrahim, you two jump out. Umar, you get a picture in front of Big Ben, and Ibrahim, you take the picture of him for him, and we'll just start driving and we'll just carry on. So I'm doing all this kind of stuff, and then we drove to Buckingham Palace, because we put it into the sat nav, where's Buckingham Palace? And Buckingham Palace is like a semicircle outside of the front, where they have like the little flowers, the area where they also have the guards, the ones who stand in front of the place. So I saw the semicircle, and there's like little cordoned off ropes, I guess. But there's like a massive gap in the middle. And I was like, oh, the massive gap must be for cars to go through. So we're going around the circle of Buckingham Palace. I saw the gap, and I went into the gap, and all you heard was beep, loads of cars behind me, like, what are you doing, you nutter? You're not supposed to go in there. I didn't know anything different. So we drove right up to the gates of Buckingham Palace. So me, Ibrahim, Umar, all got out of the car. As soon as we got out of the car, we closed the doors, and all we heard was, oi, what are you doing? And all three of us, without looking at each other, turned around and got straight back in the car and drove off. Like, we drove up to can you imagine that?
Why would you do that?
Because I didn't know how things are.
I mean, Ibrahim should have known.
Probably, right? Ibrahim, that's on you, bro. But, I was just like, well, maybe you can drive up to the gates of Buckingham Palace, and then you can look and you take pictures there. Because I'd been to Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., outside the White House, there's times that you can go up to the gates. You could take pictures from the gates. And I was like, well, they must allow you to go to the gates, because why? And it was a massive gap. It wasn't like the Nechel's gap.
Different.
So we drove in, and literally without anyone hearing, we didn't even look at each other. We just turned around and sat back in the car and just drove off. It was so funny.
Shoot you.
But you imagine that, right? Like, there's me, a Pakistani kid, Umar, Arab guy, Ibrahim, a Somali guy, and all three of us just jump out of the car, roll up to the gates of Buckingham Palace in a little Vauxhall Corsa. That's gonna be trouble. So that was just hilarious, and we did a couple of other little bits and pieces on while we were driving around London. But yeah, because I don't like London, I don't spend a lot of time in London. Do I. So I didn't know the protocols and stuff. But that day we did so many things, man. Looking back on it, we sat in the traffic for like an hour and 45 minutes going to London. And then we prayed Dhuhr and Asr in the service station. We did the lecture. We went out and found frozen yogurt. And then we drove around Big Ben and took pictures. And I just parked on the bridge, and they got out. And then we rolled up to the gates of Buckingham Palace, and that was all before like midnight. And then we got back to Birmingham. Birmingham was Birmingham. Do you know what I mean? We still have that journey to do. So that was a really funny thing looking back on it now.
Keep the faith.